World War II stands as the most lethal conflict in human history, directly responsible for an estimated 50 to 56 million deaths. This staggering figure is compounded by an additional 19 to 28 million fatalities stemming from war-related disease and famine, bringing the total death toll to a horrifying 70 to 85 million people, which represented approximately 3% of the world's population in 1940. This global catastrophe also witnessed the systematic, state-sponsored genocide of 6 million European Jews, a crime against humanity perpetrated by the Nazi regime and its collaborators, now forever known as the Holocaust. How did one man, Adolf Hitler, manage to transform a cultured and modern nation into a relentless machine of death and destruction? This is the complete story of the individual behind this unparalleled devastation, tracing his journey from an obscure childhood to the blood-soaked end of his tyrannical reign. It is an exploration into the mind of a failed artist who morphed into one of history's most ruthless dictators, revealing the chilling methods, the calculated murders, the manipulative politics, and the eventual, inevitable collapse of a regime that inflicted a deep and permanent scar on the conscience of the world. Adolf Hitler was born on the 20th of April, 1889, in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn, a community nestled on the border with Germany. He was the fourth of 6 children born to Alois Hitler, a stern and ambitious mid-level customs official, and his third wife, Clara Polzel, who was a more indulgent and caring parent. Hitler's early life was profoundly shaped by his strained and often confrontational relationship with his authoritarian father, who had little patience for his son's artistic inclinations. The death of his younger brother, Edmund, from measles in 1900 was a deeply affecting event for the young Hitler, who reportedly became more withdrawn and detached. His academic performance in school was generally poor, with the exception of gymnastics and art. After his father's sudden death in 1903, Hitler's academic struggles continued, and he eventually left school without any formal qualifications. The deepest trauma of his youth, however, came with his mother's agonizing death from breast cancer in 1907. He was devastated by the loss of the one family member to whom he felt a strong attachment. With his parents gone, he drifted to Vienna, the vibrant capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with aspirations of becoming a great artist. However, his dreams were brutally shattered when he was twice rejected by the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. The Academy's registrar suggested he pursue architecture, but this was an impossible path without the necessary academic credentials. For the next several years, Hitler lived a lonely, impoverished, and aimless existence, residing in men's hostels and scraping together a meagre living by selling his watercolors and sketches of Vienna's landmarks. It was during this period of destitution and social isolation in the multi-ethnic city of Vienna that his virulent anti-Semitism began to take root, fueled by the prevailing racist ideologies and pan-German nationalism of the time. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 offered him an escape and a sense of purpose. He enthusiastically volunteered for service in the German army, joining the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. His wartime experience was a formative and pivotal period. He served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, a dangerous role that exposed him to the constant threat of enemy fire. He was wounded at the Battle of the Somme in 1916 and was temporarily blinded in a mustard gas attack in 1918. For his bravery, he was awarded the Iron Cross, First Class, a decoration rarely given to a soldier of his rank. The war provided him with a sense of camaraderie and belonging that had been absent from his civilian life. The trauma of Germany's defeat in 1918, which he heard about while recovering in a military hospital, was a profound shock and a personal humiliation. He, like many other German nationalists, subscribed to the stab-in-the-back myth, the false belief that the German army had not been defeated on the battlefield, but was betrayed by civilian politicians and Jewish conspirators on the home front. These formative years, marked by failure, poverty, resentment, and the brutalizing experience of war, hardened his worldview and solidified the core tenets of his hateful ideology, setting him on a path of radical political engagement. In the chaotic aftermath of World War I, Germany was a nation in turmoil. The abdication of the Kaiser and the establishment of the new Weimar Republic were met with widespread discontent. the fledgling democracy struggled to cope with the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed crippling reparations, territorial losses, and the infamous war guilt clause. The country was racked by political instability, revolutionary uprisings, and severe economic hardship. It was within this volatile climate of national humiliation and societal chaos that Adolf Hitler discovered his political calling. After the armistice, he remained in the army and was assigned to an intelligence unit in Munich, tasked with monitoring political groups. In this capacity, he was ordered to infiltrate the German Workers' Party, DAP, a small right-wing extremist organization. During a party meeting in a Munich beer hall in September 1919, Hitler, initially intending only to observe, was provoked into delivering a fiery rebuttal to a speaker who advocated for Bavarian separatism. His impromptu speech, delivered with passionate conviction, captivated the small audience and caught the attention of the party's founder, Anton Drexler, who was impressed by his oratorical skills. Drexler invited him to join the party, an offer Hitler accepted, becoming the party's 55th member. He quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for public speaking proving to be his greatest asset. He became the party's chief propagandist and most effective speaker, drawing ever larger crowds with his vitriolic speeches. He railed against the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar government, Marxists, and, most obsessively, the Jews, whom he scapegoated as the root of all Germany's problems. He combined a virulent anti-Semitic ideology with pan-German nationalism and anti-capitalist rhetoric to create a potent and appealing message for a disillusioned and angry populace. In early 1920, the party was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, or the Nazi Party, to broaden its appeal. The party adopted a 25-point program that mixed nationalist, socialist, and racist ideas. By 1921, Hitler's influence within the party was so immense that he was able to challenge the existing leadership. He demanded and was granted dictatorial powers as the party's new chairman, or Führer. Under his leadership, the Nazi Party was transformed from an obscure debating club into a highly organized and disciplined paramilitary movement, complete with its own private army, the Sturmabteilung, SA, or Brown Shirts, who were used to intimidate political opponents and protect Nazi rallies. On the evening of the 8th of November 1923, Hitler and the Nazi Party made a brazen attempt to seize power in a coup d'état that would become known as the Beer Hall Putsch. Inspired by Benito Mussolini's successful March on Rome a year earlier, Hitler believed the time was ripe for a similar revolutionary act in Germany. The plan was to overthrow the conservative government of Bavaria and then march on Berlin to topple the national government of the Weimar Republic. The putsch began dramatically when Hitler, accompanied by armed stormtroopers, burst into the Bürgerbräukeller, a large beer hall in Munich where Bavarian State Commissioner Gustav von Kahr was addressing a crowd of about 3,000 people. Firing a pistol into the ceiling, Hitler declared that the national revolution had begun. He managed to force Kahr and his top officials to pledge their support for his new government at gunpoint. However, the coup was amateurishly planned and poorly executed. Support from the military and police did not materialize as Hitler had hoped. The following day, November 9th, Hitler led a march of about 2,000 Nazis through the streets of Munich towards the city centre. They were confronted by a cordon of state police, and in the ensuing gun battle, 16 Nazis and 4 police officers were killed. The putsch collapsed in a matter of minutes. Hitler escaped the scene but was arrested 2 days later and charged with high treason. His trial, which began in February 1924, could have been the end of his political career. Instead, he skillfully turned the courtroom into a grand political stage. He used the trial as a platform to broadcast his nationalist message to a much wider audience, gaining national and even international attention. He portrayed himself not as a traitor but as a German patriot who had acted out of a deep love for his country. His impassioned speeches during the trial won him considerable public sympathy. Although found guilty, he received a lenient sentence of 5 years in the comfortable Landsberg prison. He ended up serving just over 9 months of this sentence. During his time in prison, he dictated the first volume of his political manifesto and autobiography, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, to his loyal deputy, Rudolf Hess. The book laid out his radical ideology, his anti-Semitic worldview, and his future plans for Germany. The failure of the Beer Hall Putsch marked a crucial turning point in Hitler's political strategy. He realized that attempting to overthrow the state through violent revolt was a futile endeavor. He decided instead to pursue a legal path to power, resolving to destroy the democratic system of the Weimar Republic from within by exploiting its own constitutional processes. The devastating impact of the Great Depression, which began with the Wall Street crash of 1929, provided the perfect conditions for the Nazi Party's rise. As the German economy collapsed, unemployment skyrocketed, banks failed, and businesses went bankrupt. The social and psychological impact on the German people was profound, leading to widespread poverty, fear, and desperation. The mainstream political parties of the Weimar Republic seemed incapable of solving the crisis, leading to a loss of faith in democracy and a rise in political extremism on both the left and the right. The Nazi Party masterfully exploited this climate of crisis. Hitler, with his powerful and charismatic oratory, presented himself as Germany's savior. His speeches offered simple, clear-cut solutions to complex problems. He promised to restore national pride, rebuild the economy, create jobs, and defy the hated Treaty of Versailles. The party's propaganda, orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels, was relentless and highly effective, using modern techniques to spread the Nazi message through rallies, posters, and newspapers. The party's popularity surged dramatically. In the Reichstag elections of 1930, the Nazis increased their number of seats from just 12 to 107, making them the second largest party in the parliament. 2 years later, in the elections of July 1932, the NSDAP became the largest party in the Reichstag, winning 230 seats, though still short of an outright majority. Hitler ran for president against the incumbent, the aging war hero Paul von Hindenburg, and although he lost, he secured a respectable 37% of the vote. The political situation remained deadlocked, with a succession of weak and ineffective governments. After months of political intrigue and backroom deals, a group of conservative politicians, including former Chancellor Franz von Papen, persuaded President Hindenburg that they could control Hitler by bringing him into the government. They believed they could use his popular support for their own conservative agenda. On the 30th of January 1933, Hindenburg reluctantly appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. The conservative establishment had made a fatal miscalculation. Less than a month later, on February 27, the Reichstag building was set ablaze. The Nazis immediately blamed the fire on the communists, creating an atmosphere of panic and fear. Hitler convinced Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag Fire decree, an emergency measure that suspended basic civil liberties and constitutional protections, allowing for the arrest of political opponents. This decree effectively laid the groundwork for a police state. In the ensuing election in March 1933, the Nazis, using intimidation and propaganda, increased their share of the vote but still failed to win an absolute majority. To consolidate his power, Hitler then introduced the Enabling Act. On the 23rd of March 1933, with the Reichstag building surrounded by SA and SS men, the parliament passed this law, which gave Hitler and his cabinet the power to enact laws without the approval of the Reichstag for 4 years. This act effectively dismantled the last vestiges of democracy and made Hitler the absolute dictator of Germany, marking the end of the Weimar Republic and the beginning of the Third Reich. With dictatorial powers now firmly in his grasp, Hitler and the Nazi regime moved swiftly and ruthlessly to eliminate all sources of opposition and to reshape German society according to their totalitarian ideology. This process, known as Gleichschaltung, coordination, brought all aspects of life under Nazi control. In the spring of 1933, the first concentration camp for political prisoners was established at Dachau, near Munich. It would become the model for a vast network of camps that would later be used for mass murder. A nationwide boycott of Jewish-owned businesses was organized on the 1st of April 1933, marking the beginning of the state-sponsored persecution of Germany's Jewish population. All other political parties were banned or forced to dissolve, making the Nazi Party the only legal political entity in Germany. Trade unions were abolished and replaced by the German Labour Front. The press, radio, arts and education were all brought under the control of Goebbels's Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. Hitler then turned his attention to potential threats within his own party. The SA, under the leadership of Ernst Röhm, had grown to over 3 million members and was becoming a source of concern for both Hitler and the traditional German military establishment, who viewed the SA as a rival. On the Night of the Long Knives, from June 30 to the 2nd of July 1934, Hitler ordered a brutal purge of the SA's leadership. Röhm and hundreds of other perceived enemies, including old political rivals like Kurt von Schleicher and Gregor Strasser, were summarily executed by the SS, Schutzstaffel, Hitler's elite black-shirted bodyguard unit, led by Heinrich Himmler. This bloody action secured the army's support for Hitler and consolidated his absolute power. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer and Reich Chancellor. The armed forces swore an oath of personal loyalty directly to him. The regime relied on a pervasive system of state terror to maintain its grip on power. The Gestapo, secret state police, under the command of Hermann Göring and later Reinhard Heydrich, used surveillance, informants, and brutal interrogation methods to crush any form of dissent. The SS grew into a vast organization responsible for state security, intelligence, and the administration of the concentration camps. Propaganda was used relentlessly to glorify Hitler as a messianic figure and to demonize the regime's enemies, particularly the Jews. Murder and fear were not simply byproducts of the regime. They were central and indispensable instruments of Hitler's rule, ensuring the complete and terrified submission of the German people to his will. Hitler's ultimate ambitions, laid out in Mein Kampf, were racial purification and the conquest of Lebensraum, living space, for the German people in Eastern Europe. Once his power at home was secure, he turned his attention to foreign policy, systematically dismantling the post-World War I international order. He began to openly defy the Treaty of Versailles, announcing Germany's rearmament in 1935 and reoccupying the demilitarized Rhineland in 1936. The Western democracies, haunted by the memory of the Great War and preoccupied with their own economic problems, responded with a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid another conflict by making concessions to Hitler. In March 1938, German troops marched into Austria, which was annexed to the Reich in what was known as the Anschluss. This was followed by the Sudeten crisis, in which Hitler demanded the German-speaking regions of Czechoslovakia. At the Munich conference in September 1938, Britain and France agreed to his demands, sacrificing Czechoslovakia in the hope of securing peace for our time. But Hitler's appetite was insatiable. In March 1939, he broke his promises and occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. His aggressive expansionism culminated in the invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939. This act of aggression finally prompted Britain and France to declare war on Germany, triggering the start of World War II. The war provided the perfect cover for the radical implementation of Hitler's genocidal ideology. The Holocaust, the systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million European Jews, was carried out with chilling industrial efficiency. The persecution began with discriminatory laws and escalated to forced ghettoization and finally to mass murder. In the territories of Eastern Europe conquered by the German army, special mobile killing squads called Einsatzgruppen murdered over 1 million Jews in mass shootings. The final solution to the Jewish question was formalized at the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, leading to the establishment of extermination camps like Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, and Sobibor, where millions of men, women, and children were murdered in gas chambers. The Nazi regime's campaign of mass murder was not limited to the Jews. They also systematically targeted other groups they deemed racially or biologically inferior, including Roma, Gypsies, Poles, and other Slavic peoples, Soviet prisoners of war, and people with physical and mental disabilities. Political opponents, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals were also subjected to persecution and murder. Hitler's ideology, a toxic and lethal brew of racial hatred, social Darwinism, and expansionist ambition, had been translated into a war of unprecedented destruction and a genocide of unimaginable horror. By the winter of 1942 to 1943, the tide of the war had begun to turn decisively against Germany. The failure to defeat the Soviet Union and the disastrous defeat of the German Sixth Army at the Battle of Stalingrad marked a critical turning point on the Eastern Front. In North Africa, German and Italian forces were defeated by the Allies. The entry of the United States into the war in December 1941 had brought the full weight of its immense industrial and military power to bear against the Axis powers. Germany's military resources were stretched to the breaking point, fighting a war on multiple fronts. The Allied bombing campaign began to devastate German cities, crippling war production and demoralizing the civilian population. In June 1944, the Allies launched the D-Day invasion of Normandy, opening a long-awaited second front in Western Europe. As Allied armies closed in from the east and the west, the vast empire that Hitler had sought to build began to crumble. Support for Hitler among the German military elite began to wane, culminating in the failed assassination attempt of the 20th of July 1944, when a bomb planted by Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg exploded at Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters. Hitler survived the blast, and the regime responded with a brutal crackdown, executing thousands of suspected conspirators. In the final months of the war, as Soviet troops fought their way into the streets of Berlin, Hitler retreated to his subterranean Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. He became increasingly isolated, paranoid, and detached from the reality of the catastrophic situation above ground, issuing delusional orders to non-existent armies. On the 29th of April 1945, he married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a small ceremony in the bunker. He then dictated his final political testament, blaming the Jews for the war and urging the German people to continue the struggle. On the afternoon of the 30th of April 1945, just one day after marrying Braun, Adolf Hitler committed suicide by a gunshot to the head. Braun took her own life by swallowing a cyanide capsule. In accordance with his prior instructions, their bodies were carried outside to the Chancellery garden, doused in gasoline, and set on fire. Hitler's death marked the end of his tyrannical rule and the collapse of the Third Reich, a regime that had lasted just 12 years but had inflicted unparalleled suffering, leaving Europe in ruins and causing the deaths of tens of millions of people. The story of Adolf Hitler's rise to power and his subsequent reign of terror offers profound and chilling lessons about the fragility of democratic institutions and the terrifying dangers of unchecked power. It serves as a stark historical case study of how a charismatic and manipulative leader can exploit economic hardship, nationalistic fervor, and deep-seated social prejudices to systematically dismantle a democracy from within. The Nazi regime's masterful use of propaganda to create a cult of personality around Hitler and to dehumanize its perceived enemies was a crucial element in its success. The narrative of his ascent demonstrates how easily a society can descend into barbarism when critical thinking is replaced by blind obedience and when legal and moral norms are eroded. The catastrophic consequences of the policy of appeasement pursued by other nations underscore the perils of failing to confront tyranny in its early stages. Furthermore, the complicity and silence of millions of ordinary people in the face of escalating persecution and violence serve as a haunting reminder of the individual and collective moral responsibility to speak out against injustice. Remembering this dark and painful chapter of human history is not merely an academic exercise. It is a vital and necessary safeguard against the resurgence of the toxic ideologies of hatred, racism, and intolerance that led to such unimaginable devastation. The legacy of Hitler and the Holocaust is a solemn warning that resonates through the decades, teaching us that the price of indifference and silence in the face of evil is a cost humanity can never afford to pay again.